So the Global Alliance for the Future of Food is a strategic alliance of philanthropic foundations. We're made up of about 30 members, and they've all come together for collective action on food systems transformation. We believe there's a responsibility to use the collective resources to ensure that sustainable food systems are on the political, economic, and social agendas, and ultimately that we can have, greater impact when we combine our knowledge, expertise, and networks. The Global Alliance came together about 13 years ago around a problem statement, which is essentially, it's on the screen here, but essentially that industrial food systems are not fit for purpose and they're causing significant harm to humans, to society, to environments and nature, and to economics and well-being as well, especially at the farmer level and everybody kind of involved in the food value chain. We know that, when we bring multiple people together, there's multiple answers to problems and different solutions. And one of the first things we did was develop this set of 7 principles. They're really at the core of the work that we do. They shape our vision and our actions. They're really our touchstone. They express our values. They encompass the change we want to make. And we see them as an indivisible set. And that helps to make us choices about the future of shared food systems. So, renewable can't exist without equitable. It's not going to be the food system that we want to see. All of this needs to come together to really be the food system that we're driving towards. So I'm sure I don't need to say much about this to this group, but we all know that we're in a polycrisis right now. 1 in 5 deaths are related to poor diets. The global food system is a primary driver of biodiversity loss. 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions are from agriculture and the food system. Industrial and extractive food systems are at the root of these issues, and addressing these problems can really be done by transforming food systems. There's a lot of opportunity if we transform food systems to be sustainable and equitable. But food systems are extremely complex. This is a graphic that I've just kind of pulled off of Google about a food systems visualization. You can see here there's a lot of interactions, there's a lot of people, there's a lot of resources, there are a lot of goals to consider. So when making decisions about food systems, like a government policy or a business strategy, there are some obvious considerations. But it's very easy for things to get missed because they happen later in time, they happen somewhere else or to someone else, or don't impact the decision maker's immediate objectives. So a lot here doesn't really get taken into account when making decisions. And these are the invisible or hidden or ignored impacts that are commonly referred to as externalities, which is a critical aspect of true cost accounting. And it's an economic term that's defined as a positive or negative consequence of an economic activity or transaction that affects other parties without being reflected in the price of goods or services being transacted. So with complex systems, it can be really challenging to assess things adequately and make the best decisions. So finding better ways to assess all of these interactions, the positive and negative impacts, the externalities of food systems has really been a priority for the Global Alliance from the outset. And then in 2015, the Global Alliance worked with the United Nations Environment Program to convene over 150 scientists from 33 countries to address this issue. And that work led to the development of this the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity for agriculture and food framework, which is really the first true cost accounting framework for food systems. But what is true cost accounting? Well, we see true cost accounting as both an initiative and a practice, and both are really aimed at expanding our current economic methods for understanding the diverse impacts of various food systems. It takes the economic idea of capital and it reframes it not to just be goods and money, but other forms of capital. Similar to what Anna mentioned off the top, we're looking at social capital, we're looking at human and natural capital, and a huge component involves measuring what I mentioned before, these externalities, these negative impacts within the supply chain, like pollution, biodiversity destruction, worker health issues, and often companies are not held responsible for these. For example, companies might pay wages that are too low to support families, and then that shifts a portion of their labor costs to taxpayers. So nutrition benefits, housing subsidies, those sort of things. Corporations might concentrate hundreds of thousands of chickens in one place, and then that waste pollutes waterways, and taxpayers need to pay to clean them up. So just some practical examples of externalities in practice. But externalities can also be positive and have positive benefits. And these are more often accounted for, but not always. So thinking of planting trees, the money cost to plant a tree might be $5, but the tree will pay back massively in carbon sequestration and shelter. And often these positive benefits are not incorporated into costs. As long as the tree was standing, those sort of benefits are paying. And if the tree was cut down, we'd have to do a new or different calculation. So with true cost accounting, we moved from this to this. So this depiction of a food system is really at the core of true cost accounting. It helps us to organize the system into something that we can actually work with. So at the center is the agri-food value chain that we're all familiar with. This is the full range of processes and activities that characterize the life cycle of the food that we eat. This is often what people think of when they think of a food system, but in actuality, it's much broader when you consider, the external inputs, the different capitals that the value chain depends on, and also the impacts that the value chain has outside of it. So what we've done is these impacts and dependencies have been organized into these 4 capital categories. So natural capital, which is at the bottom, is defined as the limited stocks of physical and biological resources found on Earth, and their limited capacity of these ecosystems to provide ecosystem services. For example, at the bottom here, you can see that the agri-food value chain depends on pollination, and that it can impact natural capital via pollution. So this graphic here, there's some of the impacts and dependencies are listed here. Just to note that these are just examples and not a comprehensive list. Of course, there's a lot of different indicators and metrics to be including when we're thinking about true cost accounting. On the top left, we have human capital, which is the knowledge, skills, competencies, and attributes of people that facilitate the creation of personal, social, and economic well-being. In the middle is social capital. Social capital is the networks, relationships, and trust amongst individuals. And produced capital, which is the infrastructure and the financial aspects and exchanges related to the agri-food value chain. These are the elements that are often more likely considered when making food systems decisions typically. And just one note here, so often food and social capital are considered together. It's conceptually, there are some differences, but putting them together is kind of like a natural human thing. Us as humans, we see ourselves as part of society. And when we put that all together, if we put those two together, it really mimics the sustainability pillars that we're all familiar with. So environmental being natural, social and human being social, and the produced capital being economic. So there's some similarities there to draw from. So attention to the utility of true cost accounting is growing. Each year, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization releases an annual report on the state of food and agriculture. And this year and last year in 2023, both reports were focused on true cost accounting assessments of current global industrial food systems. And this was the first time ever that the SOFA report was on the same topic in 2 subsequent years. So you can see that they were really, interested in the utility and promise of true cost accounting. And both reports considered the costs and the benefits. And, while they acknowledged the contributions of current food systems, like we're all, they found that due to the significant damages from greenhouse gas and nitrogen emissions, from water use and land use changes, unhealthy dietary patterns, undernourishment, current global food systems are actually net negative, with externalized costs of over 12 trillion USD per year. It's a massive number, $12 trillion per year. And so digging into those numbers a bit, 70% of those costs were attributed to unhealthy diets linked to non-communicable diseases. And much of the environmental costs that are included in this figure here were highest in countries that were transitioning to industrial agriculture. So at that Global Alliance, we did some of our own calculations. And to shift away from industrial food systems to sustainable, equitable, healthy, and resilient food systems, would cost just a fraction of this figure. So you can see here on the screen, it's just about 430 billion annually. It's pennies compared. I think this square is actually a representation, a mathematical representation of how much smaller it is. And this is why true cost accounting is so important. It enables us to organize complicated food systems in a way that we can understand them and then be better able to assess the impacts, address the most harmful practices, and find new and positive pathways forward. So, yeah, here to me on the screen, through some true cost accounting work, it's clear that switching to sustainable food systems would be a cumulative net win. So why don't I go into a bit here about actually how to do a true cost accounting assessment, and then I have a couple of examples as well that we've been involved with. So the true cost accounting framework that was developed with the UN Environment Program is a really extremely technical guidance. It's 414 pages. It's really aimed at economists, but we've noticed that there's a lot of, governments, civil society, organizations that are really interested in how to use true cost accounting to support the work that they're doing, support the decision making that they're doing. So in 2020, the Global Alliance created this procedural guidance to support the practical application of true cost accounting. And it contains 4 phases, which you can see here on the screen. Phase 1 is framing the issue and interest, the issue of interest and your purpose of the assessment, and really prepare to undertake it. Phase 2 is about an integrated process to describe the relevant eco-agri-food systems, so that bigger picture, including those externalized capitals, and scope and focus the assessment. This third phase is about measuring impacts and using a selection of models, methods, and data, and where relevant and possible, valuing and monetizing these. And phase 4 is applying the results of your assessment, taking action with your assessment to make an impact on practice and policy. Here you can see that each of the phases and steps within the phases of TCA, a true cost accounting assessment. I won't go through each and every step. It's something you can dig into with the guidance on hand, but I do want to go through the broad strokes and highlight some notable steps. You might have some questions about this afterwards as well. So why don't I go ahead and just dig into phase 1 a little bit here on framing. So this first step to highlight here is really actually step 1, which is determining your interest. True cost accounting can be applied to a really wide range of things. You can do a true costing assessment on a single product. You could assess a specific crop. You could assess a crop in a region. You could assess a crop globally. You could assess a policy decision. You could compare 2 landscapes. You could assess a whole system. So there's a lot of different ways that true cost accounting can be used, and this first step is the first step in starting to think about that. Steps 2 to 3 are to refine your assessment and really get more specific about the objective of your of the work. Are you interested in how a decision might affect farmers? Are you interested in how a decision might change some regulatory work of a government? And then step 4 is to engage stakeholders. So you want to include relevant experts and people who may be impacted or can impact the findings. These stakeholders are really essential to help ensure that your assessment is accurate, comprehensive, and inclusive. And I say these 3 words because they're quite important. They're actually the core principles of true cost accounting that were developed by the UN Environment Program. And so as an economic framework, we want to be sure that we're not missing anything important. So being accurate, comprehensive, and inclusive is really critical in ensuring that. Another stakeholder group that you'd want to consider including in your assessment in this work is the assessment audience. So if you wanted to impact a policy, engaging policymakers with the relevant decision-making power can be a really useful way to help outline a concrete action plan and have them really inform the work at hand. And then on the right-hand side of the slide here, you can just see some snippets of the example case study that we've included in the guidance to help users think about the steps in practical terms. And the guidance also includes, the implementation guidance also includes some templates to help guide users through. So just a note about a couple of the resources within that guidance document. Phase 2 of an assessment involves describing the eco-food system and the activities of the agri-food value chain, and then scoping the study based on the description and the initial assessment purpose that you did in step 1. And this process of describing and scoping may identify, additional stakeholders. It might shift your objectives, and that's fine. The framework isn't necessarily meant to be applied in a linear approach. As you learn more, you might go backwards, you might refine things, you might engage different stakeholders, you might seek out more data. And so because TCA is a multiple capitals-based approach to systems thinking, the framework really enables you to explore all of the visible and invisible connections that food systems have with people and environment, and how that interaction happens between the food value chain and these different capitals. So the step of describing the capitals and how they interact with the food value chain is just a formalized way to map out the system relevant to the objective of the true cost accounting assessment study. Step 6 builds on the original framing that you determined in phase 1. Steps 7 and 8 look at all the activities of that agri-food value chain. And step 9 considers all of the natural, human, social, and produced inputs that make the value chain run. Step 10 describes the capital flows, so what's going into the value chain. And these are also called dependencies. So, if a food system is dependent on labor, a food system is dependent on crops. So it talks about, what are the dependencies? And it also talks about, you're also describing the outcomes. So what changes are happening to the quality and quantity of these capitals? Are we extracting and not being reciprocal? How are livelihoods? So it's really what is the quality and quantity change of those capitals? And step 12 is what impact those changes are going to have. So those are the main steps of the describing part of this phase. And then with your description of the eco-agri-food system complete, the next step, 13 to 15, are focused on scoping and refining the assessment based on your issue of interest and informed by any discoveries you made while describing the system. Assessing materiality. So materiality in step 13, it's an economic term that means assessing the importance, worth, or usefulness of something. And on the right here is an example framework for that we've used in the guidance, implementation guidance. And essentially it's, materiality is like, we don't have endless time and money to investigate every nuance of everything. We need to focus in on the elements that will have the most significant impacts and can substantially influence the assessments, and there's power in the decision makers to make some change on those sort of things. So the numbers here are relevant to the impacts that we identified in the case study that appears in the guidance, and you can see, they're in this top right hand corner are probably the most material impacts to be investigated on. And one thing to know is when you're assessing materiality, it's really critical that stakeholders are involved in this decision making, especially those who may be impacted, because they're going to have the best knowledge of what's important and what's material. And then from there you go into steps 14 and 15, which lead you to the next phases of the assessment process, or they don't. In some cases, describing the system can be enough to know the next wise step. The information you have will be clear enough that you'll be able to predict the impacts and the opportunities for change. Of course, this is not always the case, and it's critical that decisions are not being influenced by our own biases or vested interests, going back to those principles. But if getting to the end of the describe step is all you have the capacity and resources to do, it's a really extremely useful exercise to getting people on the same page about what's happening within a system, what are the opportunities for change, and how you might go about that. If you do go on to phase 3 and 4 to measure and value and to take action, there are really a range of approaches. As we know, all sorts of different data, all sorts of different, kind of mathematical models and whatnot. And really the approach that you take will be dependent on the purpose and the scope of the assessment that you're doing and the type of questions that are being asked. And this is really the same for step 4, and how you will take action is really much dependent on the content and objectives of your study. So rather than go into depth here, I'm going to share some real examples that the Global Alliance has been involved in. So depending on the scope and objective, and if you have all the data and information on hand, measuring and valuing can take a few weeks. It can even take a few years. The FAO SOFA reports were massive undertakings. But that makes sense, given that they were assessing the global food system. The assessments that the FAO SOFA team, they worked, it was a full FAO SOFA team, there was a team of economists, and it was like an intensive year-long process. They worked with comprehensive databases, the FAO country offices, and a set of external experts to get the data and do the assessments that they needed. There's a lot more in the process, in the FAO SOFA report and website. They also have an excellent interactive component that you can visit, and you can see the data and results for your own country, which is pretty cool. And again, that link will be in the description of the YouTube channel there. You can also Google it. It's pretty easy to find. And then, so the report I want to dive into a bit for showing you the measuring and valuing steps is this true value report. And then I'll spend a bit of time with the last report here on the slide, a TCI assessment we did with community managed natural farming in Andhra Pradesh, India. So first, the true value report. Over time at the Global Alliance, we've really come to understand that at the Global Alliance and really generally as a society, that progress is made more easily when we point to the good things and to what is possible. So although cost is in the name of true cost accounting, it really has the ability to assess the cost and benefits, and the cost is the sum. So what we did with this report is really feature those positive stories of transformation and apply a true cost accounting lens to the work that they were doing. One of the initiatives that we assessed in this report was Kamako. Kamako is a social enterprise in Zambia that supports local communities to adopt agroforestry and allowing the communities to put an end to wildlife poaching, deforestation, those sort of income streams that they were reliant on before, and also address food insecurity. So through the assessment, we determined that the total value of Kamako's environmentally related sustainability practices were 426 million USD per year. I pause on purpose. It's a huge number. This is an annual number, and largely due to avoided land degradation related to switching to agroforestry practices. So it's such a big number. Even the Kamako team, they were like, "What? This doesn't make sense." They second guessed it, and so what we did with them and what I'll do with you is really walk through how we came to this figure here. So we started with what we knew. So we knew that the area under sustainable agriculture practices identified in Kamako's annual report was 168,800 hectares. And then using peer-reviewed literature citing the World Bank, we know that the total economic cost of land degradation in sub-Saharan Africa is at about 60 billion USD per year. And from other World Bank data, we know that the total area of sub-Saharan Africa is 23 million hectares. And then using all that information, we can calculate that the total economic cost of land degradation per hectare per year to be $2,527. And then we can multiply that by the hectares under Kamako's sustainability practice to determine the total value of $426 million a year. So because Kamako is sustainably managing these 168,000 hectares, the ecosystem services that the land then provides, like good food growing soil, clean water, tree and soil carbon sequestration, wildlife habitat, and so on, it's valued. It's value from a true cost accounting perspective when we account for all of these environmental benefits is $426 million each year. It's an impressive figure, and it has helped Kamako communicate their impact to policymakers, to funders, and to the communities that they work with. And this is what phase 4 of the guidance is all about, really taking action. So Kamako was able to take this figure and bring it to funders, bring it to policymakers, and have more decisions made in their favor about the work that they were doing and get more support. So having a dollar figure was really impactful for Kamako. And this is the interesting thing about using an economic framework to assess the value of sustainability. Given our current economic paradigm is oriented fiscally, having a dollar figure like this can be extremely helpful for advocating to decision makers. But when doing this, there's three important considerations to take in mind that I want to impart on you. The first is monetization. When we apply a dollar value, especially to nature and people, it really needs to be done thoughtfully and with care and consideration for potential unintended consequences. Monetary units do reflect a current social norm, but some consider this, economic and monetized approach to be problematic because it's based in the capitalistic and neoliberal approaches that have led to many of the current challenges that we face today. Sometimes monetizing and qualitative measures are inappropriate or they're unable to capture an impact. If you think of, the joy a farmer or farm community would feel from a great harvest, that's hard to capture in a metric. So sometimes, holistic and inclusive measurements of value really need to be considered when we're thinking about true cost accounting. The second consideration is the price of food. When we start to do the arithmetic of, the invisible and visible costs, questions about the price of food naturally surface. And with, issues of food security, poverty, living wages being so critically important and prevalent, this is something that we need to, be keeping our eye on. So when we go through the process of understanding the costs and benefits of different food systems activities, we should be guided by the notion that, food that makes people healthier should be more affordable and readily available, and the production of food that is making people sick and causing environmental damage should be minimized. So ultimately, the utility of true cost accounting is not to change the price of food, but to allow policymakers to assess the impacts of their food, social, and agricultural policies and change those decisions to make nutritious food more affordable, ensuring fair pay for workers along the way, and really, not increasing the price of food, but making kind of like different decisions about subsidies and subsidy reform and those sort of different mechanisms. The final consideration that I want to impart is about epistemological justice, or whose knowledge counts. So true cost accounting requires a lot of data. It requires information, it requires knowledge, but this data is not just numbers and spreadsheets and peer-reviewed studies in scientific journals. It's also farmer knowledge, traditional knowledge, the knowledge held by civil society and community-based organizations through lived experience. So really being able to find ways to ensure all of this data, all of this knowledge is being incorporated. We're doing a true cost accounting assessment, ensuring that we don't have a narrow view of what counts as evidence. And by broadening that out, coupling, Western science with traditional knowledge actually makes our case stronger and more convincing, and can make the results of the study more relevant to the people, that are living in the contexts. So these three considerations are all things we took into account in 2023 when, together with local leaders, we conducted a true cost accounting assessment to compare the outcomes and impacts of natural farming practices versus chemical intensive practices in Andhra Pradesh, India. So over half the population in India is engaged in agricultural related activities. Farming's typically, been a chemical intensive process, and because of the high cost of inputs and the low performance of inputs, it's devastated tens of thousands of families through low yields, high debts, and leading to an awful crisis of farmer suicides. So the state of Andhra Pradesh saw this crisis and supported a program that had been ongoing for many years. It's now called Community Managed Natural Farming. Over 1 million farmers are practicing natural farming in the state, and natural farming relies on locally produced inputs and farmer-to-farmer training and is largely led by women's groups in the communities. So the true cost accounting study we did, we found that compared to chemical intensive farming, natural farming resulted in a doubling of crop diversity, which also led to increased household dietary diversity. 49% increase in net income, which is massive. This is in part because yields of prime crops like rice paddy, millet, red gram, they increased about 10%, so the yields increased. But it's mostly due to the significant reduction in input costs, a 44% reduction in input costs. And so this reduction in chemical input use, and the increased dietary diversity, household dietary, household dietary diversity resulted in 26% lower health costs. And lastly, natural farming increased labor needs by about 21%. It's a more hands-on intensive process. And, this could be seen as a bad thing. More people there's more labor, but it actually resulted in increased employment. And with more people engaged, it also contributed to the increase in social capital that we saw through a virtuous cycle of, information sharing, risk reduction, and collective action. So you'll notice in these facts that we didn't assign a dollar value, and it's not really needed here, especially because we were comparing systems. So just having the difference between those two systems was enough to kind of get to the results we needed. So true cost accounting has many, useful avenues and contributions. Sometimes a total dollar figure, like with Comaco, and with the United Nations FAO SOFA report. Sometimes comparing systems and elevating the often ignored facts and figures like we did with this Andhra Pradesh community managed natural farming study. And sometimes it's just getting to a clear description of the system at play. So ultimately, true cost accounting enables us to organize complex food systems in a way that allows us to understand them more clearly, assess the impacts, and then move forward by addressing the most harmful practices and finding positive pathways forward. So I'm just going to wrap up on these next two slides here about so at the Global Alliance, we believe so strongly in the ability of true cost accounting to be a lever to transform food systems that in 2021, we launched an initiative to accelerate the use, to mainstream the use of true cost accounting. The True Cost Accounting Accelerator is a global network advocating for the transition to a just and sustainable healthy food system through widespread adoption of true cost accounting. It's an open network, so if what I've talked about here piques your interest, this is a place where you could join and a place to learn and get more involved. In fact, it's a great time. So between now and April of next year, the Accelerator is developing their 5-year action plan, and it's being informed by a series of workshops and webinars related to policy, private sector, finance and investment, evaluation, communications, and movement convergence. So there's a URL here you can visit to get more involved and learn more about that work. And you can also reach out to me. Here's my info on the screen, and I hope you found the information today I shared useful. And if you'd like to follow up with me on anything, please do. And yeah, I'm looking forward to your questions.